Hi, everybody. Justin Acri along with Chris Kane getting you set for Central Arkansas football for 2021. And certainly there's a lot of excitement around this program coming into the season, Chris. Last year was sort of a historic year for a lot of reasons for Central Arkansas. Not necessarily all good reasons, but it was an impressive feat to just pull off a year of football for the Bears. And some successes and some things that obviously they'd like to improve on for this coming season. But with the guys coming back, there's a lot of anticipation in Conway.
Yeah, and it was a year of uncertainty last year. We didn't even know who we were going to be playing the very next week as the schedule was shifting constantly. But it all started on that field in Montgomery, Alabama, where the Bears took the first college football game of the year and spearheaded it into a 9-game campaign. Most teams couldn't say they did that last year, especially at the FCS level. And this year, something else unprecedented, a brand new league for the Bears, a lot of excitement in Conway as they join the A-Sun.
That's exactly right. Well, we'll talk about some players coming up and some of the opponents as we go through, but let's start with that because that's really the big news for the Bears as they leave the Southland Conference. So they're in that new league and they're playing in the AQ7 combination of the WAC and the A-Sun, and of course there will be some familiar foes along the way. The Alliance will feature Abilene Christian, Lamar, and Sam Houston State. Stephen F. Austin from the WAC, and of course the Bears from Central Arkansas. Eastern Kentucky, a team the Bears saw a couple of times last year. Jacksonville State, a storied program, all from the A-Sun. There are other WAC members and A-Sun members that are not going to participate in this AQ7. Dixie State and Tarleton will be on the schedule for some of these teams, but will not be eligible for the automatic qualifier in the NCAA as they reclassify up to Division I. And then the 7 schools that are termed the AQ7 will play a single round robin, with each school having 3 home and 3 road contests. And the home team will, of course, have some advantages here. But, Chris, these are some tough challenges. And, there's teams that some familiar, some not so familiar for the Bears.
Well, 3 top 15 teams, including the Bears, when you talk about Sam Houston State, your defending champ, Jacksonville State, a perennial powerhouse, and then, you mentioned those familiar foes. There's going to be a few of them we're going to talk about today because it's really a collaboration effort, and it's really wise of these leagues to do that. They were both making the jump, and in the landscape of college football, which is ever evolving, they made these leaps, and they also realized they needed a little help along the way, so they turned to some, familiar territory to get these games in and make sure that they qualify for. Of course, everybody wants to get in the playoffs. That's what you got to get to.
Right, and we anticipate both of these leagues will look a little bit different next year. So the team with the highest winning percentage among the AQ7 will get that automatic qualifier, and I think we both anticipate there will be some at-large bids coming out of this combination as well. The A-Sun members, Kennesaw State, North Alabama, as we mentioned, some of the other schools will continue to participate in the Big South for the coming season. New Mexico State's a WAC member. They're going to be an FBS independent, so it's a little bit of a mix mash. Chris mentioned the poll. We can take a quick look at that as well. And Sam Houston State, the defending national champions, I guess if you want to look at it that way, they played in the spring.
They technically have the title, right?
That is true. They were picked to, I guess this is, the rankings for the AQ7 going into the season, not national rankings, of course, but Sam Houston will be among the nation's leaders from an anticipation standpoint going in among all teams. Number 1, though, picked in the AQ7 here. Central Arkansas picked 2nd, which is certainly a lot of, I think, a lot of respect for this program, Chris. Jacksonville State 3rd, SFA is 4th with Eastern Kentucky, Abilene Christian, and a Lamar team that has had their share of struggles. A lot of change going on down there, though, and we're going to make a trip to Beaumont this year.
Yes, we are. We'll get to that in just a little bit. We have a great team back after a 5-4 fall campaign. Last year, losses, you look at the loss list, there's a reason they're ranked in the top 15 with 4 losses. At UAB, Arkansas State, and number 1 North Dakota State. And what it could have been. So many different things in that game, Justin, where a ball bouncing a different direction could have changed the outcome.
Yeah, well, Nick Neckwas is back, Chris,
yes.
and he will go down as the only man ever to intercept Trey Lance in a college football game.
Legendary.
So that's exactly right. So he's got bragging rights. Well, speaking of players, let's get into that a little bit here because we've got lots of super seniors. These are the guys that could have moved on, finished their careers, but because of COVID, there is at least one good thing, if only one good thing about COVID. You get some of these great players back, and they will play a key role as the Bears march, hopefully, towards not only an AQ7 title, but maybe get in the mix for a national championship conversation. Nathan Grant, Jack Short, Toby Sanderson, the center, and then a Javius Brown, who's not only one of the great players on the defensive line, Chris, an area where they feel really good, but also one of the great characters on this team.
He certainly is. 2 centerpieces, literally in the center and integral to both of those sides of the ball, with Toby Sanderson and Javius Brown coming back. Looking forward to seeing their leadership really be on display and bring some of those new guys along and some of the really high-touted transfers we've heard coming in.
Right.
They know what the culture is at UCA, and they're going to be able to bring these guys in and show them it's all about winning. Now, some key pieces on offense, it all starts with the quarterback.
Yeah, let's talk about them. Braylon Smith and sophomore wide receiver Tyler Hudson, 2 of the 35 FCS players named to the 2021 Walter Payton Award watch list, and that award, obviously named for Walter Payton, one of the all-time greats, goes to the National Offensive Player of the Year in the FCS. And Admittedly, Smith did not have the kind of year he wanted last year, Chris. But when you look through the numbers, if you want to run through those, I mean, not too shabby in the big scheme of things.
19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, about 233 yards a game, 56% completion rate, something I know that I talked to Coach Collins, that's something they're working on. And look, those are numbers that a lot of quarterbacks would dream about at the Division I level, but Braylon Smith has a higher standard, and he knows that. The coaches know that. And you hear from Coach Brown, he knows that Braylon knows last year wasn't his best, and he's looking forward to finishing his senior campaign as strong as ever. So, fourth in school history, 6,652 passing yards, 58 touchdown passes. I don't think he's going to catch his coach near the century mark up there, but he could. It's possible.
I like his chances,
it's
actually.
Possible.
If they play the full schedule and they get into the postseason, look out.
It's possible. It's a tall order. His 570 completions, though, 919 attempts, both ranked third in UCA history, and he's a preseason first-team All-A-Sun selection. We're going to get used to that throughout the year.
Tyler Hudson, let's talk about him. One of the most exciting players ever to step on campus, a finalist for that Walter Payton Award in the 2021 year. He's the Fall Offensive Player of the Year in the Southland Conference last season. He led the Bears with 50 catches for 845 yards, almost 17 yards a catch, 7 touchdowns last fall. Also a first-team All-Southland Conference selection as a punt returner on the way out of that league. And in 2019, he was the SLC Freshman of the Year. So an incredible talent, and he's got a pretty good running mate on the other side.
I mean, you talk about two of the most dynamic receivers in the league, Lawan Winningham. Team-high 12 touchdown receptions last year. Caught 37 passes, 522 yards. That's good enough for 14.1 yards per catch. And his 12 touchdowns tied for the second-best single season in school history. Just imagine if they played a full schedule. Top tackler and safety Cameron Godfrey's back on the other side of the ball, leading the team with 51 tackles, 2 interceptions. Coach Brown has raved about him in practices so far this fall. And he says the defensive backfield, Justin, the deepest on the team, and it's not even close.
That's right. Well, but look, I mean, you look at the defensive line, you look at the linebacking group. I mean, there really are not any holes on that defense. They say that's what wins championships, and the Bears, I think, have a championship quality defense, and we'll talk about who's going to be directing that in just a bit. Let's go through a couple of key losses, and their leading rusher last year, Kier Crossley, is out. Cameron Myers, they feel really good about at running back. He's also a dynamic kick returner, had a 96-yarder for a touchdown last year. And defensively, kind of a key piece in that linebacking core. Dre Matthews is gone, Chris. But
he had some big games.
Yeah, but you feel good about the other guys who are back, and most of their top tacklers, including Godfrey, are back.
Yeah, and that's going to be a key part of this defense is getting some of those seniors back. We talked about Ajavius, but Cameron Godfrey, absolutely a big part of it as well. And you mentioned they're going to have a new coordinator, but that's really one of the only big changes at the top is most of the coaching staff has remained intact.
Well, and at the very top, Nathan Brown is back, and that's key.
That's the big one, yes.
Yeah, he is in his 4th year now as a head coach, 20-13 in his time leading the Bears. Ken Collins, another familiar face on campus, not only as a player, but now as an OC, is back. And really, this is a DC that is new, but old at the same time.
And a guy from the state of Arkansas, too. Right. And we talked with Coach Brown. He said he's been trying to get Matt Kitchens back for 3 years. 3rd time was a charm. He was a safeties coach here under Coach Campbell at UCA from 2015 to 17. He followed him to South Alabama in the same role, and now he's coming back to call the defense as defensive coordinator, a Russellville native, a guy who grew up here in the state. I know that Coach Brown is super excited to have him back on campus.
All right, well, behind us, we've been looking at highlights here, Chris, of the start of last season, and the Bears got to play in the very first game, and I believe the second game of college football last year, and they opened with a win over Austin Peay. It's interesting because Nathan Page was on that team, and now he's part of the Bears team after starting his career at Arkansas State. But there you go, another tie-in. Arkansas State, that's where the Bears will open again this year, a team they beat 2 times ago, played in a competitive game in Jonesboro last year, and now we'll go back to Jonesboro this year.
It all starts at Centennial Bank Stadium. First game of the year. It was played last year in the remnants of Hurricane Delta. The wind was going sideways. The rain was torrential, and the Red Wolves pulled away from the Bears in that one. They won 50-27. This year, the game will be played as the Delta variant of COVID-19.
To say that dirty word again.
Yes, it continues to make life difficult for teams as they prepare for the season, but A-State is led by a new coach, Butch Jones. He spent 3 seasons as an assistant at Alabama. He has an overall head coaching record of 84-54, 4 conference championships that were split between his stints at Central Michigan and Cincinnati. His time at Tennessee didn't go too well, but let's face it, which coach has had success there since Phil Fulmer left, and he didn't even leave on great terms. He takes over a team that went 4-7 overall last year in Sunbelt play, or overall Sunbelt play 2-6, and the Red Wolves' offensive unit is expected to be loaded again. QB Lane Hatcher leading the way with a bevy of talented backs. Receivers not named Jonathan Adams. We're very excited about that. They also returned 4 starters on the offensive line, and their defense has 8 starters returning on a unit that really struggled in 2020. They finished second to last in the league in total defense last season. They allowed 37 points per game, 470 yards against. It was particularly hampered in the secondary, too. That's something to keep in mind. They allowed 314 pass yards per game. What does our friend Steve Sullivan always say? A year older?
It's not always a year better.
We'll have to wait and see. UCA 1-2 against the Red Wolves since 2010. That victory coming in 2016. And if you want to join us up in Craighead County for the game, A-State has announced a full return to attendance in 2020.
Big game because it's the first one, but obviously an opportunity to play FBS opponent in state. And new coaching staff. I think that's what jumps off the page at me. We've done a lot of scouting on them early in this summer, looking at where the coaches were prior to here. They've got a ton of talent. Lane Hatcher's back at quarterback. We know what he is. They've got a ton of receivers that always make plays. But that's a big trip for us because it's an opportunity to go beat a Sun Belt school. And we feel like we can compete with those guys every year.
Bears get another short trip on the road in week 2 as they make the trek to Springfield against Missouri State. This is a team they played last year 2 times over, won both. And both were competitive games, though, very close games. The Bears won 27-20, the Purple Bears, that is, in Conway, and 33-24, a little more breathing room up in Springfield. Missouri State played 3 games in the fall, including a shutout loss to Oklahoma and those 2 losses to Central Arkansas. Second-year coach Bobby Petrino, though no stranger to folks here in the Natural State as far as football fans go, his impact on that program has been immediate. It's been impressive, and they turned it around big time in the spring. They went 5-1. They tied for their league title, and they went back to the FCS playoffs for the first time in 31 years. And that league we talked about, that's the Missouri Valley Conference. Arguably, or is it even arguable? I don't know. The best football conference in America at the FCS level. The Bears lost to the North Dakota Fighting Hawks, talking about Missouri State, in the first round of the playoffs. 7 of their players have been named to preseason All-Missouri Valley Conference. Again, that means a lot. Montre Braswell, a junior defensive back, is their lone first-teamer. He had 41 tackles and tied for second in the league with 3 interceptions. Again, 41 tackles doesn't sound impressive, but again, short season, got to keep that in mind. Their leading tackler, linebacker Tyler Wiltz. Chris, he's a guy we remember from last season. Certainly is going to be a big part of their mix as well. QBs shared time in most games last year, and when you think Petrino, you think offense, you think quarterback play. Wasn't very impressive last year. Their most efficient passer, Matt Struck, is gone. Combined, their passers completed just 55% of their passes, 10 interceptions, 5 touchdowns. Not a very good year at the quarterback position. But Missouri State, I assume, will take a big step forward offensively. They'll return this game in the season opener next year in Conway after the Bears make that trip up there. And I know Coach Brown looking forward to facing off with Coach Petrino and the Missouri State Bears again.
Well, I'm sure Missouri State has us circled. And, we beat them twice in the fall. And Coach Petrino did a great job with getting a co-Missouri Valley championship in the spring. And so, getting a team twice, it's hard enough to beat a team once, but to beat them twice, they're going to be gunning for us. So we're going to have to bring our A game up in Springfield, Missouri. Those guys, we know how physical they are. They play a physical brand of football. And that's what the Missouri Valley Conference is about.
All right, after coming back from Missouri State, we have our first home game of the season. Second in-state opponent in 3 games as UAPB will make the 1 hour and 6-minute commute to Conway after a great spring showing. That's right, the Golden Lions were one of dozens of FCS teams to play in the spring, and they made the most of it. They won the SWAC West Division for the first time since 2012. They finished the limited spring season 4-1. That one loss coming in the SWAC title game against Alabama A&M. They set a school record 10 selections to the all-conference team. Head coach Doc Gamble's done a phenomenal job. He was named SWAC Coach of the Year. His offense was led by junior quarterback Skylar Perry. He ranked 4th in total offense. Their team did 370 yards per game. Perry threw 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, over 1,200 yards in those limited games last year. Defensively, the team relies on the outstanding play of senior defensive back Jalen Thigpen. He recorded 5 interceptions in those 5 contests. How long has it been since these 2 in-state teams have played? September 13th, 2008. George W. Bush still in office, Michael Jackson still alive, and Kanye West hadn't even interrupted Taylor Swift on stage at the MTV Video Music Awards yet. The Bears won big, though, 41-17.
It was an ugly, stormy night at War Memorial.
I was about to say, you were at that game. Head coach Nathan Brown was playing quarterback in that game. His line? Little pedestrian, but you mentioned it, big storm. He was efficient, 22 of 32, 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did have 60 yards gained on the ground, by the way. Hey, the first home game kicks off at 6 p.m. Tickets, just go online, ucasports.com, or call 501-852-2234.
We get to open up the new stripes, and so we're excited about an in-state opponent. Hopefully it'll be a huge crowd. coming over to Conway, Arkansas, and UAPB. Again, they were 4-0, 5-0 going into the SWAC West Championship. Coach Gamble's done a great job there at UAPB. He's got a renewed energy with that program. I know they've got athletes. We've recruited against them some on the recruiting trail. So it's going to be a tough matchup, but one we feel like we should go in, win, and set ourselves up for the conference season.
Let's shift into Game 4 and a familiar foe coming up. It's a second straight home game, and it sees Central Arkansas welcome in longtime Southland rival Sam Houston State. I will tell you, this is one team I will not miss, although I hope the Bears can hook up maybe in the playoffs against the Bearcats going forward. Bearcats, as we mentioned, they won the national championship in the spring, and a 23-21 win over South Dakota State was the difference. They finished 10-0 on the year. A 10-yard touchdown pass with 16 seconds left was the difference. It was Sam's first FCS title in 3 tries, having lost the championship game in 2011 and 2012. But again, a great program over the years. Bearcats not only return the winning pass combination of QB Eric Schmid, who was the Southland Player of the Year, and wide receiver Ife Adeyi, who had 5 catches in that title game, but over a dozen players who made the all-WAC preseason team. Schmid averaged 280 yards passing a game last season, hit 20 touchdown passes in 10 games. His top target is a Harvard transfer, Chris, Cody Crest, and he also returns after his lone season in Huntsville resulted in 41 receptions. Another Bearcat of note is the WAC preseason player of the year, defensive lineman Jakari K. He created havoc for opposing offenses, 38 tackles, 13 and a half tackles for loss and 6 sacks, and he also had an interception and 4 forced fumbles. The WAC has been without football since 2012, and in its return, the league has formed an alliance, as we mentioned, with the A-Sun for scheduling purposes. So it's a new age for the WAC, and of course, it's a new era for the A-Sun, and for Sam Houston State, same old, same old. They're picked by the coaches to win the alliance of the 7 teams, as we mentioned, that will get them an automatic qualifier if they can pull it off. The Bears and many others will have something to say about that. As we mentioned, a couple other teams, Dixie State, Tarleton, they won't be part of that schedule, but they will be on the schedule of some of these teams. So you'll see teams like Sam Houston and others playing those schools, but they won't figure into that 7.
No, and here's Coach on playing the defending champs.
Last time we played Sam Houston was a big second half comeback in 2019, and that really set us up for the Southland Conference Championship. I know they're gunning for us. Coach Keeler does a great job there, defending national champions in the spring season and defending Southland champions from the spring season. We have a rivalry with Sam Houston. It's been us or Sam Houston really for the last 10 years in the Southland Conference. We don't like orange a whole lot here in Conway.
All right, we're talking about the first long road trip of the season for Central Arkansas. Not day trips to Jonesboro or Springfield, Missouri. No, we're going to Abilene, Texas. That's right. A little over 7 hours away. It's a town known as the Key City, and this could be a key game for the Bears, as they're going to hopefully be riding high after a win against preseason number 1 Sam Houston State. But how will they respond after making that nearly 8-hour trip to the middle of the Lone Star State? Wildcats played a consolidated fall schedule. They went 1-5, and 3 of those losses were to FBS opponents, a respectable thing. But one of those losses was to Division II Angelo State at home. Not a great loss for them last year. They only played 1 home game, by the way, so they're going to be no doubt ready to fill that stadium. It's a $50 million stadium built just back in 2017. It's beautiful if you've never been. Much different than their old stadium. The Bears are going to be their first game as part of the AQ7 games this season for the Wildcats. Head coach Adam Durrell enters his 5th season with the program, 14-26 overall. The Wildcats have a QB battle going on at fall camp between Peyton Marshall, who's an Iowa transfer. He took over last season, finished with 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and over 1,200 yards passing. And then Stone Early, a redshirt freshman who played in 2 games. He actually started the final regular season game. They're going to be fielding 5 new starters on the offensive line who are trying to lead the way for a couple of talented running backs, including talented freshmen Jeremiah Dobbins and Tyrese White. Dobbins scored 5 touchdowns in those 6 games last year. Defensively, they had a big loss at linebacker. A 3-year starter, Jack Gibbons, left for Minnesota as part of the ever-changing world of transfers. He's gone, so it's a big void to fill. He racked up 258 tackles, 22.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in 3 seasons. The Bears, though, have owned this series with the Wildcats. 5-1 record, kickoff set for 6 p.m. October 2nd. The Bears will then enjoy a nice week off before their next opponent. Here's Coach Brown on heading to Abilene.
Abilene's always an interesting team. They're always tough to beat. They play well against us. They're well coached. I haven't seen, not seen them for a couple of years. It'll be fun to see what they've recruited and how they've recruited to that new stadium over there. Obviously, we went over there in 2018, and it's a beautiful place. So that's a huge one for us because it's a long road trip, and you've got to be able to steal some games on the road, and that's going to be an opportunity for that.
Well, like Missouri State, Central Arkansas played Eastern Kentucky not once but twice last year in a home-and-home, and unlike with Missouri State, the Bears split instead of sweeping those two matchups, with the home teams winning both games. The Colonels won in Richmond, Kentucky, 31-28. Great setting, speaking of, for football. Not an easy trip in the first game. Bears return the favor in Conway 3 weeks later, 37-25. Like Central Arkansas, Eastern Kentucky played a full fall schedule last season. They finished 3-6. The Bears will host them in Week 6 for Hall of Fame weekend. And just like last year in Conway, the Bears will be coming off a bye. The Colonels are picked 5th out of the 7 teams competing for the playoff automatic qualifier. 6 of their team members were named preseason All-A-Sun. Others receiving preseason honors: lineman Peyton Collins, all-purpose performer Jyron Mitchell, D-lineman Quentin Floyd, defensive back Joseph Sales, and linebacker Matthew Jackson, who also earned preseason third-team All-America honors after leading this team with 79 tackles and 8 tackles for loss. Their top rusher, big guy, Alonzo Booth, is out. He's a key loss off last year's team. Here's Coach Brown on facing this year's version of the Colonels.
We know them well, similar to Missouri State, playing them twice in 2020. They beat us late up there in Kentucky, and then us obviously jumping out early against them here at home in 2020 and holding on late. So they've got a great team. They've got a great defense. They're very physical. I think they have a little bit of a quarterback battle. It'll be solidified by that point. But excited about playing Coach Wells. He does a great job coaching the guys.
And then we head back to Beaumont. Words only said with excitement if you were an oil tycoon in the early 1900s, but also if you're a Central Arkansas Bear, because while the road may be long to get there, it's always a sweet stay for Central Arkansas. They've never lost to the Cardinals on the road. UCA coming off their biggest margin of victory in this series, a 45-17 stomping in 2019. As for Lamar, the Cardinals played an all-Southland Conference schedule in the spring. They finished 2-4. Lamar is led by new coach Blaine Morgan. He's a former Air Force quarterback who took the job as a first-year head coach. Morgan was an outstanding player at Air Force, winning 20 of the 23 games he started for the Falcons. He was all-WAC performer. He now guides this Cardinals team into the conference he once dominated over 2 decades ago. The spring saw the debut on offense of quarterback Jalen Dummett, 5 new starters on their O-line, and they return all this season. Overall, the team returns 23 starters, 10 on offense, 9 on defense, and all 4 specialists. Not much success coming back. They certainly have some experience together. Overall, they have averaged only 264 yards per game on offense. They gave up over 500. Kickoff set for October 23rd at 6 p.m. And from Conway, drive time about 7 hours to Beaumont. Here's Coach Brown on the start of long back-to-back road trips.
Lamar's a great place to play. Look, we've had a lot of success in Beaumont, Texas, and again, Lamar, they've been a recent playoff team in 2018, so we know they've got some talent down there, a new coaching staff that we're not familiar with, so it'll be new to us, but again, we love playing in Beaumont.
Bear fans will have about a 7.5-hour drive if they want to witness history on Halloween weekend as Central Arkansas takes on Jacksonville State in football for the very first time. That game will be played in Jacksonville, Alabama, which is between Birmingham and Atlanta. The Gamecocks are picked 3rd in the AQ7 preseason poll, but they have plenty to crow about after going 6-1 in the spring and making the FCS playoffs. They beat Davidson 49-14 before losing the following week at Delaware 20-14. This program is used to success and playing in the postseason, having made the playoffs 7 of the last 8 seasons. JSU has plenty of talent on this year's roster as well. 4 Gamecocks have been tabbed as preseason All-Americans, including redshirt sophomore safety Nicario Harper, defensive end DJ Coleman, offensive lineman Tylen Grable, and their quarterback Zarek Cooper, who's also on the Peyton Award watch list. Cooper's tied the school record with 61 touchdown passes despite missing the spring season with an injury. He's just 161 yards away from the all-time passing yardage mark at Jacksonville State as well. And he's going to spread it around to a talented group of receivers, Chris. Last season, 9 players had double-digit receptions and 4 others had 9 on the season. And like Coach Brown, Jacksonville State is led by John Grass, who is coming back to his alma mater. So he is entering his 8th season. He's 68-21 at the helm. The Gamecocks will be well tested before they host Central Arkansas. They open at UAB. Bears know how tough that can be. They were there last year. Then they play at Florida State, taking on a former Bear, Michael Norvell, as the head coach before their matchup with the Bears. They will also play Sam Houston State the week before. So they are going to be certainly well tested and maybe a little bit tired, hopefully, for the Bears. And I know Coach Brown is really looking forward to taking on this storied program. It will be a big-time measuring stick for Central Arkansas.
That's a big game. And Jacksonville State's been one of the perennial powers for the last 8 or 10 years at the FCS level. A lot of familiarity with that coaching staff. They've got Coach Max Thurman on their staff, who was my defensive coordinator in 2018. They've got Coach Stacks, who was with South Alabama, and Coach Campbell. He's there as their defensive line coach. I think they had 10 or 11 wins in the 2020 fall and spring season. They're loaded. They'll be tough to beat, but that's a huge game for us to gauge where we're at that point in the season and setting us up for hopefully an automatic bid to the playoffs.
Well, homecoming will be so sweet if the Bears can find a way to win that game at Jacksonville State, and it will be a much-needed stay in Conway after the long trips back-to-back. Texas Wesleyan University, ever heard of them? They're a small private Methodist university based in Fort Worth, and they come to town. The Rams are members of the Sooner Athletic Conference in Division II, and one of their fellow co-members is a fellow Arkansas Institution of Higher Learning in Lyon College, who they'll play the next week. Texas Wesleyan and Central Arkansas meet for the first time this fall. The Rams only played 2 games in the fall. Their spring schedule was canceled due to COVID. They finished 1-1. They are ranked 7th out of 10 teams in the SAC football poll. Head coach Joe Prudhomme is entering his 5th season after restarting this football program. And by restarting it, I mean it was on a 76-year hiatus before he arrived. He was head coach of a nearby Nolan Catholic High School before taking the job. In their last full season, the Rams were pretty good on offense for league play. 32.9 points per game. They finished with 8 all-conference selections. And his overall record at the school, not great, 7-26, but they have shown improvement each season. 1, 2, 3 wins. They went 500 last year. And here's Coach Brown on homecoming against an unfamiliar foe.
A good schedule by Dr. T, getting us a 5th home game. Excited to bring Texas Wesleyan here. Again, another opportunity for us to play in front of our home crowd here in Conway, Arkansas. Don't know a ton about Texas Wesleyan, but we'll be ready for them. I think they'll be excited about getting an opportunity to beat a Division I team. So we've got to respond and be ready to play them tough, no matter what the circumstances are.
The penultimate game of the 2021 regular season for Central Arkansas should be filled with good vibes and better memories. And Chris, you talked about Lamar earlier. Similar feelings this week. Nobody on the current roster has ever lost to Stephen F. Austin. In fact, the last time SFA beat UCA in football, Barack Obama was still in his first term as president. Since the last loss in 2012, the Bears have rattled off 6 straight in the series, including a 30-7 drubbing in 2019. Head coach Colby Carthel is in his 2nd season in Nacogdoches, and he led the Jacks to a 6-4 season last fall, including a 24-6 win at Eastern Kentucky, which was the lone common opponent for SFA in Central Arkansas. Junior Xavier Gibson is the lone representative for the Lumberjacks on the preseason All-American team. He led the Jacks with 52 catches for 841 yards and 9 touchdowns last year. And for his career, impressive, 104 receptions, 1,775 yards, and 16 touchdowns. Offensive lineman Zach Ingram, defensive end B.J. Thompson, linebacker Brevin Randall joined Gibson on the preseason All-WAC team after all 4 were named All-Southland Conference in their final season. SFA is picked 4th in the AQ7. Coach Brown on facing a familiar foe with certainly some good history.
Coach Carthel's done a great job there. He's really revitalized that program. To me, they've recruited about as well as anybody at the FCS level over the last 3 or 4 years. It'll be a tough matchup. And look, we've had a lot of success against SFA, the last 6 or 7 years, and I don't look for that to change, but I know it's going to be a battle because they've recruited well. They've got some talented players. They've got a returning starting quarterback. And again, Xavier Gibson, one of the best wide receivers as well.
The final game of the regular season is on the road in a new environment for Central Arkansas. We're going to Stephenville, Texas, home of the Tarleton State Texans. Tarleton, who will begin its second year of transition into NCAA Division I, as we mentioned, will begin its first as a member of the Western Athletic Conference's revival of college football. And since they're making that transition, they're not a member of the AQ7 Alliance this season, and they're not eligible for the postseason until 2024. They're going to be hosting the Bears in Memorial Stadium. It's a 10,000-seat venue built in the late 70s. It went through a huge remodel in 2019. So if you plan on going to the game, it might be a nicer experience. The Texans are led by head coach Todd Whitten, who is, get this, in his third stint at the school. That's right, third as a head coach. Started in 96, left for another job. Came back in 2000 to 2004, left for the Sam Houston State job. And that was from 2005 to 2009. He was an assistant at Lamar, head coach at a high school in Fort Worth, then an assistant at UTEP, and now, I'm exhausted, about to black out. He's back at Tarleton. He has some talent, though. Now, his team was voted third in the WAC preseason poll as an all-conference wide receiver. This is going to be one to watch. Tariq Bitson. He was a spring standout, over 600 yards, 7 touchdowns, 87.7 yards per game. And an all-conference lineman, and Zach Perry, he led a group of big men, only allowed 1.3 sacks per game. A couple of defenders to watch, all-conference DB, Devin Hafford, and linebacker Rennell Wilson, both 6-year seniors. They were a part of his first recruiting class in his latest stint. Yeah, that's right. That was back in 2016. Kickoff set for Saturday, November 20th. It's at 6 p.m. Driving distance is about 7 hours to get to Stephenville. It's about an hour away from Fort Worth. Here's Coach on the last regular season game of 2021.
Yes, it'll be a fun trip. Never been there. And so, they've got a very nice stadium, a very nice setup. Don't know a whole lot about their program. I know Coach Collins has some connections with that staff and that program through his ties through the years. But again, a team that's making the transition from the Division II to the FCS level, we look forward to that ending the season on that, hopefully on a note to springboard us into the playoffs.
All eyes on the postseason, the fall season coming to a close, hoping that we can get through this season without any post moments at this point.
Well, and listen, I mean, it should be pointed out, we talked to Coach Brown leading into the season, and one of the key factors for this team was being available, right? I mean, they say the best ability is availability.
Absolutely,
well,
always. His
team is, as far as scholarship players go and his coaching staff, 100% vaccinated. So the Bears are certainly doing their part. They obviously want to play. And everything is measured by what you do in the postseason. The Bears have had some great regular seasons that unfortunately have not led to postseason success. This is a team that seems to have the makeup and the moxie to go deep in the playoffs for the first time, maybe get to a quarterfinal, a semifinal. I mean, dare to dream, a championship game.
Those are the next levels.
This team has all the pieces to get there, Chris, and this could be a very magical year in Conway. There's no question.
Before last season, the Bears were regulars in the playoffs in the last several years. A national seed 2 out of the last 3, making the playoffs 3 out of the last 4. This has become a staple. And Coach Brown talks about the playoffs are the lower bar. That's where we just start talking about standards and then trying to elevate it. So you're right. Can they break through this year? They were a team that led the charge last year in terms of just playing. Got to give a lot of credit to Dr. Brad Teague and scheduling those games and getting these kids the opportunity to play on the field. This year, with last season behind us, we can look forward to a full schedule, and hopefully this team, after gelling last season and a lot of uncertainty, can find a way to make that next jump.
There's no question. Well, we're certainly ready to get going. We're excited about it, and Chris and I will be having the call along with RJ Hawk. We've got 2 different radio stations you can catch it on. Locally here in Central Arkansas, the Point 94.1, and in Conway, the student station, the Bear 93.3. And we're certainly looking forward to bringing you all the games, home and away. And we'll see you out there on the stripes. Go Bears.